The stars looked peaceful through the viewport of the Earth Alliance frigate Indomitable. Captain Do-Hyun Lee stood on the bridge watching the distant lights with calm eyes. He had been in space for 7 years now, and moments like these still made him feel small in a good way. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. "All systems normal, Captain," said Ji-Woo Kim from the navigation console. She was young but skilled, always precise with her work. "We're following the planned route along the border zone." Do-Hyun nodded. "Good, stay alert. This sector has been quiet, but that doesn't mean it will stay that way." The communications officer, Hyun-Woo Park, looked up from his screen. "Sir, I'm picking up some strange readings. Could be interference, but..." The ship shook violently. Red lights flashed across every console. Do-Hyun grabbed the command chair to steady himself as another explosion rocked the vessel. "Battle stations. Report." Do-Hyun's voice cut through the chaos. Ji-Woo's fingers flew over her controls. "Multiple contacts. Vraxil warships, sir. 3 heavy cruisers and at least 5 fighters. They came out of nowhere." The Vraxil. Do-Hyun's jaw tightened. The Empire was known throughout the galaxy for its cruelty. They didn't just fight wars. They enjoyed breaking their enemies, making examples of prisoners. Every species that encountered them learned to fear their interrogation facilities. Another blast hit the Indomitable. The lights flickered. Smoke started filling the bridge from a damaged console. "Shields down to 30%, Hyun-Woo called out. "We can't take much more of this." Do-Hyun assessed the situation in seconds. They were outgunned and surrounded. His ship was a frigate built for patrol and reconnaissance, not heavy combat. The Vraxil had planned this ambush perfectly, but his crew didn't need to die here. "Prepare all escape pods," Do-Hyun ordered. "Everyone to evacuation stations now." Ji-Woo turned to face him, shock on her face. "Captain, we can't just..." "That's an order, Lieutenant. Get everyone off this ship. I'll buy you time." The crew hesitated. They had served together for 2 years. They were more than just colleagues. But they also knew their captain. When Do-Hyun Lee gave an order in that tone, you followed it. "Move." Do-Hyun barked. The bridge crew rushed to the emergency exits. Hyun-Woo stopped at the door, looking back. "Sir, you can't pilot this alone. I'll be right behind you."
"Go, it was a lie."
They both knew it. But Hyun-Woo nodded and left. Do-Hyun slid into the pilot's seat. His hands moved across the controls, routing all remaining power to the engines and maneuvering thrusters. The Indomitable was dying, but she could still move. He angled the ship toward the largest Vraxil cruiser and pushed the throttle forward. The Vraxil warships noticed the change immediately. They focused their fire on the bridge, trying to disable the ship before it could ram them. But Do-Hyun was already dodging, weaving the damaged frigate through space like a fighter pilot. Each maneuver gave his crew precious seconds to reach the escape pods. On his tactical display, green lights began blinking. Escape pods launching. One by one, his crew was getting away. The Vraxil would be too busy with him to chase them all. 5 pods away. 10, 15. The ship groaned around him. Metal screamed as hull plates buckled. Fire suppression systems failed. Do-Hyun kept flying, kept the Vraxil focused on him. 20 pods away. Almost everyone was out. A massive explosion tore through the engine section. The ship lurched forward, out of control now. Do-Hyun fought the controls, but it was over. He had given his crew their chance. Now he watched as the last escape pod launched. They were safe. The bridge doors exploded inward. Vraxil soldiers poured in, their armored forms moving with frightening speed. They were tall, covered in dark gray exoskeletons with glowing red markings. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but their movements showed deadly intent. Do-Hyun stood up from the pilot's seat. He grabbed a piece of broken metal from a destroyed console. Not much of a weapon, but it was something. The first Vraxil soldier rushed him. Do-Hyun sidestepped and drove the metal shard into a weak point in the armor's neck joint. The soldier went down. The second came immediately after. Do-Hyun used the falling body as a shield, then kicked out hard, catching the second soldier in the knee. The joint bent backward with a crack. 3 more soldiers converged on him. Do-Hyun was fast, trained in close combat by Earth's special forces. But he was one human against trained alien warriors in powered armor. He fought with everything he had. He took down 2 more soldiers using their own weapons against them, targeting weak points, moving constantly. But there were too many. A stun blast hit him from behind. His muscles locked up. He fell to the deck, unable to move. More soldiers surrounded him. Through blurring vision, he saw a larger figure enter the bridge. This Vraxil was different. His armor was decorated with symbols of rank. He moved with authority. The other soldiers stepped aside for him. The commander walked to where Do-hyun lay paralyzed. He knelt down, studying the human with what might have been curiosity. "You fought well," the commander said in perfect English. The translation device built into his armor made his voice sound mechanical. 7 of my soldiers. Impressive for such a small creature." Do-hyun couldn't respond. The stun effect was still active. But his eyes burned with defiance. The commander stood. "I am Commander Thexabal. You are now a prisoner of the Vraxil Empire. Your crew escaped, but you will serve a greater purpose. We know little about human psychology. You will teach us much." 2 soldiers hauled Do-hyun to his feet. His muscles were starting to respond again, but restraints locked around his wrists before he could move, heavy metallic bands that hummed with energy. "Take him to the holding cell," Thexval ordered. "Prepare transfer to Krell 9. The Krell Master will be interested in this one." Krell 9. Even through the haze of the stun effect, Do-hyun knew that name. Every species in the galaxy knew it. The prison world where the Vraxil sent prisoners they wanted to break completely, a place where hope went to die. They dragged him off the bridge of his ship. As he passed through the corridors, he saw the damage from the battle. Fires burning, systems destroyed. The Indomitable had been his home. Now she was a wreck, but his crew was alive. That was what mattered. They threw him into a small cell on the Vraxil cruiser. The door sealed with a hiss. Do-hyun sat on the cold metal floor, testing the restraints. They were solid. No breaking them. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. His body hurt from the fight. His head ached from the stun blast, but his mind was clear. His name was Captain Do-hyun Lee. Serial number 77349821DL. Earth Alliance Special Forces, currently commanding officer of the frigate Indomitable. He had a sister named Mina back on Earth. She was studying medicine. He had promised her he would come home. These were the things he would hold on to. His identity, his memories, his promise. Let them take him to Krell 9. Let them try their torture. He was human. His species had crawled out of caves, survived ice ages, endured plagues and wars and disasters that would have destroyed softer species. Humanity didn't break easily. The Vraxil were about to learn that lesson. Through the small window in his cell, Do-hyun watched the stars pass by. Somewhere out there was Earth. Somewhere out there was home. He would hold on to that thought no matter what came next. The journey to Krell 9 took 3 days. Do-hyun spent the time in silence preparing his mind. He knew what was coming. Every soldier received training on resistance to interrogation. But he knew the Vraxil methods went beyond standard torture. They used technology, psychology, and time itself as weapons, but Do-hyun had something they didn't expect. He had humanity's greatest trait, not strength or intelligence or technology. He had stubbornness. The simple, unreasonable refusal to quit even when quitting made sense. When the ship finally docked at Krell 9, Do-hyun was ready. They pulled him from the cell and marched him through steel corridors. Other prisoners watched from behind force fields. Different species, all with the same broken look in their eyes. Some had been here for years. Others were fresh, still fighting internally against their fate. At the end of the corridor stood a massive door. It opened slowly, revealing a chamber beyond, and in that chamber stood the Krell Master, Vothrak. He was enormous, even for a Vraxil. His armor was black with red veins of energy running through it. His helmet retracted, showing a face that was almost skull-like, with cold eyes that had seen countless prisoners break. "Welcome to Krell 9, human," Vothrak said. His voice was deep and resonated through the chamber. "I have broken every species in this galaxy. You will be no different." Do-hyun met his gaze steadily. He didn't speak. He just stared back with calm eyes. Vothrak smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Good, you have spirit. That makes it more satisfying when you finally scream." The guards pushed Do-hyun forward into the chamber. The door sealed behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. The breaking would begin now. The pain was unlike anything Do-hyun had experienced before. Not the sharp pain of a wound or the dull ache of exhaustion. This was something designed by experts who had studied suffering across 1,000 worlds. The neural stimulator sent pulses directly into his nervous system, making every nerve ending scream at once. He was strapped to a metal chair in the center of a white room. No windows. No features except the chair and the devices mounted on the walls. Vothrak stood before him, watching with those cold eyes. "Your name," the Krell Master said calmly. Do-hyun's jaw was clenched so tight he thought his teeth might crack. Through the pain, he forced out words. "Captain Do-hyun Lee, serial number 77349821 DL Earth Alliance. Your mission parameters. What was your ship doing in that sector?" "Captain Do-hyun Lee, serial number 77349821 DL Earth Alliance." Vothrak increased the neural stimulator's intensity. The pain doubled. Do-hyun's body convulsed against the restraints. A sound escaped his throat, half gasp and half groan. But he didn't scream. "Not yet, you will answer," Vothrak said. "They all do eventually. Some take hours, some take days, but they all break." When Do-hyun could breathe again, he repeated the same words. "Name, rank, serial number." Nothing more. This continued for hours. Then the session ended. Guards came and dragged Do-hyun back to his cell. He collapsed on the floor, every muscle trembling. His body was undamaged. That was the terrible efficiency of Vraxel torture. They left no marks, caused no injuries, just pure agony that vanished the moment they stopped. Do-hyun lay on the cold floor and focused on breathing. In and out, steady, controlled. He thought about his training. They had warned him about torture, taught him techniques. Compartmentalize the pain, build mental walls, find something to hold on to. He thought about Mina, his little sister, though she wasn't so little anymore. She was 24 now, in her final year of medical school. He remembered her graduation from university, how proud she had been. She wanted to join the medical corps, to help people in the colonies. She had his same stubborn determination. "Come home, Do-hyun," she had said when he left for this assignment. "Promise me you'll come home." "I promise," he had told her. He intended to keep that promise. Even if he died here, he would do it as himself. Not broken, not betrayed. Just Do-hyun. The days blurred together. They came for him every morning. The sessions lasted for hours. Vothrak used different methods each time. Neural pain, sensory deprivation, bright lights and loud sounds that never stopped. Drugs that made his thoughts foggy and confused. But Do-hyun held on. Name, rank, serial number. That was all they would get. After the first week, Vothrak changed tactics. They put Do-hyun in an isolation chamber. Complete darkness. Complete silence. No sight, no sound, no sensation except the hard floor beneath him. Time lost all meaning. Was he there for hours? Days? He couldn't tell. In the darkness, his mind tried to wander. Isolation did strange things to human brains. He knew that. So he fought it by staying active mentally. He recited poetry he had memorized in school. Long passages from old books. He did mathematics in his head. Complex equations that required focus. He rebuilt starship engine designs from memory, piece by piece. When they finally pulled him from the isolation chamber, Vothrak was surprised to see Do-hyun's eyes still clear and focused. "Remarkable," the Krell Master said. "Most species begin hallucinating within 48 hours. You were in there for 6 days. 6 days." Do-hyun filed that information away. Good to know time was still moving forward. "Your resistance is noted," Vothrak continued, "but ultimately futile. We have methods you cannot imagine." The next method was the memory chamber. They strapped Do-hyun into a device that projected images directly into his brain, holographic simulations that felt absolutely real. They showed him Earth burning, cities destroyed, his sister Mina dying slowly, calling his name. It looked real. It felt real. But Do-hyun knew it wasn't. He closed his eyes inside the simulation and reminded himself of basic facts. The Vraxel Empire was far from Earth. They were in a cold war with humanity, but actual warfare hadn't reached the home system. These were lies designed to break his will. When the simulation ended, Vothrak studied him with something that might have been frustration. "You knew it was false," Do-hyun said nothing. "How?" "The simulation is perfect. We have broken warriors with centuries of experience using this method." Still, Do-hyun remained silent. He wouldn't give them anything. Not even an explanation of how he resisted. Weeks passed. Vothrak tried chemical torture next. Drugs that lowered mental defenses, made prisoners suggestible and compliant. But human biochemistry was still poorly understood by most galactic species. The drugs had unexpected effects. Some made Do-hyun sick, others made him dizzy, but none of them made him talk. The guards began to notice something strange. This human prisoner was different. He was thin now, his body showing the effects of minimal food and constant stress. Scars covered his arms from various torture implements. But his eyes hadn't changed. They still held that calm defiance. One guard, a younger Vraxil named Kexal, spoke to another when they thought Do-hyun couldn't hear. "The Krell Master is worried. This is taking too long. It's just one prisoner. What does it matter? It matters because we have never failed before. If word spreads that a human resisted for this long, it makes us look weak." Do-hyun filed that away too. He was becoming a problem for them. Good. During one session, Vothrak tried a new approach. Instead of pain, he offered comfort. They gave Do-hyun food, real food for the first time in weeks. They cleaned his cell, treated his minor injuries. "You have suffered enough," Vothrak said, his voice almost kind. "Your crew escaped. They are safe. Your mission is over. There's no shame in cooperation now. Tell us about Earth's defense networks, and this can all end." Do-hyun ate the food slowly. It tasted amazing after weeks of nutrient paste. When he finished, he looked at Vothrak and spoke for the first time beyond his name and rank. No, just that one word. But it carried absolute certainty. Vothrak's false kindness evaporated. "You fool. Do you think this is heroic? You will break. It is only a matter of time." "Maybe," Do-hyun said quietly, "but not today." They returned him to the harsh treatment. But something had shifted. Vothrak was no longer confident. He was determined now, almost desperate. Breaking this human had become personal. 2 months after his capture, Do-hyun was in his cell when he heard whispers from nearby prisoners. They had ways of communicating through the ventilation system. Quiet words passed from cell to cell. "The human still hasn't broken," someone whispered. "The guards talk about it. Impossible. No one lasts this long. I heard them say the Krell Master is requesting special authorization from the High Command. They want to try something new." Do-hyun listened but said nothing. He had learned that some prisoners were informants hoping to trade information for better treatment. He wouldn't risk compromising himself. But the whispers continued over the following days. Word was spreading through Krell 9, the unbreakable human. It was becoming a story, a legend among the broken and the damned. Vothrak eventually came to Do-hyun's cell personally. He stood outside the force field studying his prisoner. "You have become an anomaly. Do you know what that means?" Do-hyun sat against the wall, conserving energy. He met the Krell Master's gaze but didn't respond. "It means you have drawn attention. The High Command wants to know how one human can resist techniques that break species with far greater mental capabilities. They wonder if this is a human trait or if you are simply extraordinary among your kind." That thought seemed to disturb Vothrak more than anything. The idea that all humans might be like this. "We will find out," Vothrak said. "We will break you, and then we will understand your species. And when we understand you, we will know how to break all humans." He left without another word. Do-hyun closed his eyes. His body was exhausted. Every day was a battle just to maintain his sense of self. But he was still here, still aware. Still Do-hyun. He thought about his training again. They had taught him that survival in captivity wasn't about being strong. It was about being persistent. About lasting one more day, then one more, then one more. Not because you thought rescue was coming, but because that's what you did. You endured. Humanity had always been good at enduring. Their planet had tried to kill them in 1,000 ways. Ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, predators, scarcity. And humans had survived it all through sheer stubborn refusal to die. Do-hyun carried that legacy in his genes, in his culture, in his training. The Vraxil thought they could break him with pain and isolation and fear, but those things were just part of existence. Humans had evolved to handle them. What the Vraxil didn't understand was that you couldn't break something that was built to bend. Humans weren't rigid. They were flexible. They adapted. They found ways to survive in impossible circumstances. In his cell, Do-hyun began his mental exercises again. Poetry first, then mathematics, then starship designs, keeping his mind active, staying alert, maintaining his identity. He didn't know how long he could last, but he knew he would last as long as necessary, because he was human and humans didn't quit. Outside his cell, guards passed by. One of them glanced at the human prisoner and felt something unfamiliar. Was it respect, fear? He couldn't tell. But he knew one thing. This small creature had done what no other prisoner had managed. He had made the Krell Master doubt. And in a place like Krell 9, doubt was the first crack in an otherwise perfect system. The news traveled in whispers first. In the dark corners of Krell 9, prisoners shared information the way others might share food or water. Information was currency here, sometimes the only currency that mattered. A Thryn merchant named Velzix had been in the cell next to Dohyun for 3 weeks. The Thryn were a species known for their trading networks and information gathering. Velzix had been captured for selling restricted technology, and the Vraxel wanted to know his supplier networks. They had broken him within 5 days, but even broken, Velzix still noticed things. He heard the guards talking. He saw them looking at the human with something that might have been nervousness. When Velzix was finally released after giving up everything he knew, he carried one more piece of information with him, the story of the unbreakable human. 2 weeks after his release, Velzix was back in Thryn space meeting with his fellow merchants in a busy trading port. Over drinks that glowed faintly blue, he told them what he had seen. The human lasted months, Velzix said, his 3-fingered hands gesturing for emphasis. I watched them take him away every day for torture sessions. I heard his cell at night. No screaming, no begging, just silence. The Krell Master himself came to question him personally, again and again. Nothing worked. The other merchants leaned in with interest. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic stage, only 70 years since first contact. Most species still knew little about them except that they came from a death world with gravity that would crush most civilized species. One prisoner means nothing, another merchant said. Perhaps he was specially trained. Perhaps, Velzix agreed. But the guards were afraid. I could see it. They have tortured thousands of beings over the years. They know what breaking looks like. And this human was not breaking. The story spread through the Thryn networks like fire through dry grass. Within days, it had reached a dozen systems. Within weeks, it was being discussed in trading posts across the galaxy. On the planet Quellan Prime, home to the peaceful Quellan Consortium, scientists heard the story with academic interest. The Quellans were scholars and researchers, a species that valued knowledge above all else. They had been studying humans since first contact, fascinated by a species that had developed advanced technology, despite coming from such a hostile planet. Dr. Rinsha, a Quellan neurobiologist, called a conference of her colleagues. They met in a research facility that overlooked one of Quellan Prime's beautiful crystal oceans. If this story is accurate, Rinsha said, it suggests human psychological resilience is far beyond what we initially measured. We need to understand why. They pulled up human brain scans from medical databases, compared them to other species. The differences were subtle but significant. The human amygdala, the part of the brain that processed fear and emotion, was surprisingly large, but so was their prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and impulse control. Look at this balance, another scientist said, pointing to the scans. They have strong emotional responses but also strong regulatory capability. Fear triggers, but reason can override. More than that, Rinsha added, look at their evolutionary history. Humans evolved in constant crisis. Climate shifts, resource scarcity, predators. Their development was shaped by adversity in ways most species never experienced. So their brains literally evolved to handle trauma, not just handle it, to function through it. A human under stress doesn't shut down. They keep processing, keep planning, keep acting. It's remarkable. The Quellans published their findings in academic journals. The paper was titled Psychological Resilience in Homo sapiens, an Evolutionary Perspective. It spread through scientific communities across the galaxy, but not everyone who heard the story was interested in academics. On Arxia Station, military headquarters of the Arxian Republic, General Kothra studied intelligence reports with keen interest. The Arxians were longtime rivals of the Vraxil Empire. They had fought 3 wars over the past 2 centuries, each one ending in stalemate. The Arxians knew the Vraxil well, including their interrogation capabilities. If humans can resist Vraxil methods, Kothra said to his staff, they would make valuable allies. Imagine having soldiers who cannot be broken even in capture. One human, General. We should not assume all humans are like this. Then we should find out. Open diplomatic channels with the Terran Coalition. Carefully, we don't want to alarm the Vraxil yet, but I want to know more about these humans. The Arxian Republic began quiet negotiations with Earth. Not formal alliances yet, just careful conversations, feeling out possibilities. Meanwhile, on Earth itself, the Terran Coalition had received intelligence about Do-hyun's capture and location through their own networks. Commander So-min Han of Special Operations sat in a secure briefing room, reviewing the information. The room was deep underground in the military complex outside Seoul. Present were representatives from multiple branches of Earth's defense forces. On the screens were star maps showing Krell 9's location, deep in Vraxil territory. "Rescue is nearly impossible," said one officer. "We would need to penetrate 3 layers of Vraxil defenses. The casualties would be enormous." So-min studied the maps with a tactical eye. She had served with Do-hyun years ago, before he took command of the Indomitable. She knew what kind of man he was, stubborn, dedicated, the kind of soldier who would rather die than break. "What are our diplomatic options?" she asked. A representative from the Foreign Ministry shook her head. "The Vraxil refuse all communication about prisoners. It's their policy. Taking prisoners is about demonstrating dominance to them. They won't negotiate." "Then we plan a rescue operation," So-min said. "I don't care how impossible it looks. Captain Lee is one of ours and we don't abandon our people. Commander, with respect, by the time we could mount such an operation, he might already be—" "Don't." So-min's voice cut like a blade. "Don't finish that sentence. We plan the rescue. Start gathering intelligence on Krell 9's defenses. Look for weaknesses. And find me allies. Someone who has reason to hurt the Vraxil." The diplomat, Tae-hyun Cho, nodded slowly. "The Arxian Republic has been making careful inquiries. They seem interested in human capabilities." "Good. Open that channel. Carefully." While governments and militaries moved in their slow, careful ways, the story of the unbreakable human continued to spread through less official channels. In the prison itself, Do-hyun remained unaware of his growing reputation. He was focused on survival, on maintaining his identity through another day of torture. But around him, other prisoners watched and whispered. There was a Quellan political dissident named Minko, who had been imprisoned for speaking against Vraxil expansion. He had been broken within 2 weeks, given up the names of his colleagues, betrayed everything he believed in. Now he lived with that guilt every day. But watching the human resist gave him something he thought he had lost. Hope. Not hope for escape or rescue, just hope that resistance was still possible. That the Vraxil were not invincible. Minko began scratching marks on his cell wall. Not counting days, counting the human sessions. Each mark represented another day the human had endured. Another day the Vraxil had failed. Other prisoners noticed. They began their own counts. The human's resistance became a shared moment of defiance, even for those who had already broken. The guards noticed this too. They saw how other prisoners looked at the human now, with something that might have been reverence. It made them uncomfortable. Kexal, the young guard who had noticed the human's strange resilience, reported to Vothrak. "The other prisoners are using the human as a symbol. His resistance is affecting morale." Vothrak stood in his office looking at files on the human. Medical reports, psychological assessments. None of it made sense. By every metric they had, this prisoner should have broken long ago. "Then we increase isolation," Vothrak said. "No more cells near other prisoners. Complete separation. And if that doesn't work?" Vothrak was silent for a long moment. "Then we try something new." Back on Earth, So-min's team worked around the clock. They gathered every piece of intelligence on Krell 9. Guard rotations, supply shipments, structural weaknesses. It was slow work, but they were building a picture. Tae-hyun made progress with the Arxians. Careful negotiations, feeling out the possibility of cooperation. The Arxians were interested but cautious. They wanted to know more about humans before committing to anything. "Let me arrange something," Tae-hyun said during one secure communication. "A demonstration of human capabilities. Something to show you we're worth the diplomatic risk." The Arxian representative considered this. "We are interested in your special operations forces. Their training methods. We have heard stories." "Stories about what?" "About humans who don't quit, who accomplish missions that other species consider impossible. We thought they were exaggerations. But now with this prisoner at Krell 9, they're not exaggerations," Tae-hyun said quietly. Humans are persistent. It's our primary trait. We don't have the strongest bodies or the longest lifespans. We're not telepathic or naturally gifted with technology, but we're very, very hard to stop. Across the galaxy, in 100 different locations, people were learning about humanity through the lens of one stubborn captain who refused to break. Thrin merchants added human resilience to their databases of species traits. Quellan scientists wrote papers about human neurology. Arxian generals made strategic assessments about human military potential. And in the dark cells of Krell 9, prisoners scratched marks on walls, counting days of resistance. Do-hyun knew none of this. He only knew the White Room, the pain, the isolation. He only knew that each day he woke up was another day he had survived. Another day he was still himself. But his resistance was having effects he couldn't see, like ripples spreading across still water. His simple refusal to quit was changing how an entire galaxy thought about humanity. In the Vraxel High Command, officials received reports about the human prisoner with growing concern. This was supposed to be simple: capture, interrogate, break, extract information. It was a process they had perfected over centuries. But the human was breaking the process itself. "Order Vothrak to use any means necessary," the High Commander said. "This has gone on long enough. Break the human, or we will find someone who can." The message was sent. Vothrak received it and stood in his office for a long time, thinking. Any means necessary. That was authorization to go beyond standard methods, to take risks. He had an idea. A terrible idea, but possibly the only thing that would work. If he couldn't break the human through direct torture, perhaps he could break him indirectly, through another human. The Vraxil began planning new raids on human settlements, looking specifically for civilian prisoners. They needed another human, not a soldier this time. Someone softer, someone the captain might care about, someone he would break for. Minko began scratching marks on his cell wall, not counting days, counting the human sessions. Each mark represented another day the human had endured, another day the Vraxil had failed. Other prisoners noticed. They began their own counts. The human's resistance became a shared moment of defiance, even for those who had already broken. The guards noticed this too. They saw how other prisoners looked at the human now, with something that might have been reverence. It made them uncomfortable. Kexal, the young guard who had noticed the human's strange resilience, reported to Vothrak. "The other prisoners are using the human as a symbol. His resistance is affecting morale." Vothrak stood in his office looking at files on the human. Medical reports, psychological assessments. None of it made sense. By every metric they had, this prisoner should have broken long ago. "Then we increase isolation," Vothrak said. "No more cells near other prisoners. Complete separation. And if that doesn't work?" Vothrak was silent for a long moment. "Then we try something new." Back on Earth, Soman's team worked around the clock. They gathered every piece of intelligence on Krell 9. Guard rotations, supply shipments, structural weaknesses. It was slow work, but they were building a picture. Taehyun made progress with the Arxians, careful negotiations, feeling out the possibility of cooperation. The Arxians were interested but cautious. They wanted to know more about humans before committing to anything. "Let me arrange something," Taehyun said during one secure communication. "A demonstration of human capabilities. Something to show you we're worth the diplomatic risk." The Arxian representative considered this. "We are interested in your special operations forces. Their training methods. We have heard stories. Stories about what? About humans who don't quit, who accomplish missions that other species consider impossible. We thought they were exaggerations. But now with this prisoner at Krell 9, they're not exaggerations," Taehyun said quietly. "Humans are persistent. It's our primary trait. We don't have the strongest bodies or the longest lifespans. We're not telepathic or naturally gifted with technology, but we're very, very hard to stop." Across the galaxy, in 100 different locations, people were learning about humanity through the lens of one stubborn captain who refused to break. Thrin merchants added human resilience to their databases of species traits. Quellan scientists wrote papers about human neurology. Arxian generals made strategic assessments about human military potential. And in the dark cells of Krell 9, prisoners scratched marks on walls, counting days of resistance. Do-hyun knew none of this. He only knew the White Room, the pain, the isolation. He only knew that each day he woke up was another day he had survived. Another day he was still himself. but his resistance was having effects he couldn't see. Like ripples spreading across still water, his simple refusal to quit was changing how an entire galaxy thought about humanity. In the Vraxil High Command, officials received reports about the human prisoner with growing concern. This was supposed to be simple: capture, interrogate, break, extract information. It was a process they had perfected over centuries. But the human was breaking the process itself. "Order Vothrak to use any means necessary," the High Commander said. "This has gone on long enough. Break the human, or we will find someone who can." The message was sent. Vothrak received it and stood in his office for a long time, thinking. Any means necessary, that was authorization to go beyond standard methods. To take risks. He had an idea. A terrible idea. But possibly the only thing that would work. If he couldn't break the human through, direct toward 6 months had passed since Do-hyun's capture. He had lost weight, his body showing the strain of constant torture and minimal nutrition. Scars covered his arms and back from various implements. But his eyes still held that quiet defiance that drove Vothrak to frustration. The Krell Master stood outside Do-hyun's cell, watching the human sleep. Even in sleep, the captain's face showed tension. But he wasn't broken. Vothrak had broken warriors who had trained for decades in mental resistance. He had broken telepathic species who could partition their minds into separate compartments. He had broken beings who literally felt no physical pain. But this human, this small creature from a backwater world, continued to resist. Vothrak's career was at stake now. The High Command had given him an ultimatum: break the human or be replaced. Such a failure would destroy his reputation, his position, everything he had built over a long career. So he had approved the raid. A civilian settlement on the edge of human space. The Vraxil strike team had been efficient and brutal. They took 12 prisoners, all civilians. Engineers, teachers, colonists, just trying to build a life. Among them was a woman named Yuna Choi. She was 28 years old, an environmental engineer working on terraforming projects. She had never expected to see combat or capture. When the Vraxil ships appeared over her colony, she had tried to help others evacuate. The last thing she remembered was an explosion, then darkness. She woke up in a cell on Krell 9. Yuna sat on the cold floor, trying to control her breathing. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced it down. She had heard stories about this place. Everyone had. The prison where the Vraxil broke their captives. A guard appeared outside her cell. "You, come with us." They took her down corridors lit by harsh white lights. Other prisoners watched from their cells, their faces showing a mix of pity and despair. Finally, they reached a larger chamber. In the center was the White Room, the torture chamber, and in that room, strapped to the metal chair, was a man. He was thin, scarred, his hair longer than military regulation, but his eyes were alert, aware. Vothrak stood beside the chair. "Captain Lee, I would like to introduce you to Yuna Choi, a civilian engineer from the colony on Helios 4. She was taken 3 days ago in a raid specifically designed to bring her here." Do-hyun's jaw tightened. This was new. They had never brought another prisoner into his sessions before. Yuna looked at the man in the chair. She recognized the name, Captain Lee. The story had spread even to the colonies. The soldier who had been resisting for months. She had thought it was exaggerated, a morale-building myth. But here he was, real and suffering. "Here is the situation," Vothrak said calmly. "You will provide me with information about Earth's defense networks. Deployment patterns, fleet locations, military codes, everything." "No," Do-hyun said, "I haven't finished. If you refuse, I will torture Miss Choi instead. Every refusal from you will result in 1 hour of pain for her. You can end her suffering at any time by simply answering my questions." Do-hyun's hands clenched against the chair's restraints. This was the scenario they had warned about in training. Using innocence as leverage, the nightmare situation that broke even strong-willed soldiers. Yuna felt ice in her stomach. She understood what was happening. This was psychological torture for the captain. Make him feel responsible for her pain. Use his protective instincts against him. Vothrak gestured to his guards. They grabbed Yuna and strapped her into a second chair that had been brought into the room. The neural stimulator was activated. Yuna screamed as the pain hit, every nerve ending firing at once. Do-hyun closed his eyes, but he couldn't close his ears. He heard her screaming, heard the raw agony in her voice. His training said to compartmentalize, to separate himself from emotion. But how could he? This was an innocent person suffering because of him. After 5 minutes that felt like hours, they stopped. Yuna slumped in the chair, gasping for breath. That was a demonstration, Vothrak said. Now, Captain, what are the locations of Earth's fleet staging areas? Do-hyun opened his eyes. He looked at Yuna, then at Vothrak. His voice was rough. Captain Do-hyun Lee, serial number 7734-9821-DL, Earth Alliance. Vothrak activated the stimulator again. Yuna's screams filled the chamber. This continued for an hour. Then 2. Vothrak would ask questions. Do-hyun would refuse. Yuna would suffer. Each cycle was agony, not just for Yuna but for Do-hyun, watching helplessly as another human paid for his silence. Finally, Vothrak paused. You can end this, Captain. Just answer the questions. Do-hyun's face was wet with tears he couldn't control, but he looked at Yuna, really looked at her. She was exhausted, in pain, terrified. But she was also looking back at him. And in her eyes, he saw something unexpected. She was shaking her head. Slightly, almost imperceptibly. But the message was clear. Don't break for me, Do-hyun spoke, but not to Vothrak. He spoke in Korean. Words the Vraxil translation systems might not catch immediately. Be strong, he said to Yuna. Earth will remember us. Both of us, don't tell them anything. They're already dead to you, but you'll never betray our people. Stay yourself. Or perhaps he could break him indirectly, through another human. The Vraxil began planning new raids on human settlements, looking specifically for civilian prisoners. They needed another human, not a soldier this time. Someone softer, someone the captain might care about, someone he would break for. Yuna understood. This was bigger than just 2 prisoners. If they broke here, if they gave up Earth's secrets, more people would die. More colonies would be raided. Their suffering would be meaningless. She nodded, tears on her own face, and then she spoke back to him in Korean. I understand. Don't break for me. I can handle this. Vothrak realized they were communicating. He activated the translator for Korean. But by then the message had been delivered. How touching, Vothrak said coldly. But ultimately pointless. Pain is pain. Fear is fear. You will both break eventually. But something had changed in that chamber. Do-hyun wasn't alone anymore. Yuna wasn't alone. They had each other. 2 humans facing impossible odds together. And somehow that made it bearable. The sessions continued for days. Vothrak tortured Yuna in front of Do-hyun. Then he tortured Do-hyun in front of Yuna. He tried every combination, every psychological trick. The guilt, the helplessness, the desire to protect, but the 2 humans held firm. They would look at each other between sessions, sharing strength without words. When Do-hyun was weak, Yuna's determination gave him reason to continue. When Yuna wanted to quit, Do-hyun's example reminded her that endurance was possible. Other prisoners began to notice. Word spread through the prison again. Not 1 unbreakable human. 2. The guards talked about it nervously. This wasn't in the protocols. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. Vothrak grew desperate. He increased the intensity, used drugs, used isolation, brought them together and pulled them apart. Nothing worked. One night in adjacent cells, Do-hyun and Yuna managed to whisper through the ventilation system. How do you do it? Yuna asked. Her voice was hoarse from screaming. How do you keep going? I think about what giving up means, Do-hyun said quietly. If I break, if I give them what they want, people die. Maybe people I know. Maybe people like you, innocent colonists just trying to live. I can't carry that weight, but the pain is temporary. Betrayal is forever. I'd rather hurt than betray. Yuna was quiet for a moment. My family always said I was stubborn. I guess they were right. Despite everything, Do-hyun smiled slightly. Mine too. In the cell next to Yuna was Minko, the Quellan who had been broken weeks ago. He listened to the 2 humans and felt something he thought he had lost. Not hope for rescue, but hope that perhaps he could find himself again. That being broken wasn't permanent. He started counting marks again. Days of human resistance. 2 sets of marks now. This act of defiance, small as it was, caught on. Other prisoners began their own marks. Their own quiet resistance. The humans had shown that refusing to break was possible. And if it was possible, why not try? Vothrak noticed the change in the prison. The other prisoners were less compliant, More difficult? Guards reported increased incidents of minor resistance. Nothing major but a shift in atmosphere, all because 2 humans wouldn't break. The Krell Master called for a meeting with his senior guards. We need to regain control. The humans are inspiring the other prisoners. Perhaps we should separate them permanently, suggested one guard. No, I want them to see each other suffer. That's the point. Then perhaps, permission to speak freely? Granted. Perhaps we cannot break them. Perhaps humans are simply resistant to our methods. Vothrak's anger flared. Unacceptable. We have never failed. We will not fail now. But privately he was beginning to wonder. The High Command was asking questions. His career was hanging by a thread, and these 2 humans, these small, stubborn creatures, were destroying everything he had built. He decided on one final gambit. He would announce a prison-wide punishment. Every day the humans didn't cooperate, other prisoners would be tortured. Turn the entire prison against them. Make them social pariahs. Break them through guilt and isolation. The announcement was made. Other prisoners would suffer for human defiance. But the effect wasn't what Vothrak expected. Instead of turning against the humans, some prisoners began their own small acts of resistance. If they were going to suffer anyway, why not suffer for something? Minko stopped eating. A small protest, but his own. A Thryn prisoner refused to answer questions during his interrogation. A young guard reported feeling sick and couldn't complete his duties. Cracks were forming in Krell 9's perfect system. And those cracks started with 2 humans who simply refused to break. In his office, Vothrak stared at reports he couldn't believe. The prison was becoming unstable, and it was all because of 2 prisoners who wouldn't submit. He made a decision. If he couldn't break them, he would kill them. Make an example. Show everyone what happened to those who resisted. But that would be admitting failure, and failure was unacceptable. Vothrak realized with cold certainty that he was trapped. The humans had won. Not by escaping or fighting back, but by simply being themselves, by refusing to become what the Vraxil wanted them to be. It was in its way the perfect resistance. Commander Somenhan stood in the briefing room aboard the Earth Alliance carrier Resolute, studying the holographic display of Krell 9. 6 months of planning had led to this moment. 6 months of gathering intelligence, building alliances, and preparing for a mission that had less than a 30% chance of success. Final review, she said to her assembled team. We hit the prison during their shift change when security is thinnest. Alpha team breaches the detention level. Beta team secures our exit route. We have 12 minutes from breach to evacuation. Questions? Lieutenant Hyunwoo Park, the communications officer from the Indomitable, raised his hand. He had volunteered immediately when he learned about the rescue mission. What about prisoner transport? If we find more than just Captain Lee? We bring everyone we can, Somin said firmly. No one gets left behind. Next to the Earth ships floated an unexpected ally. 3 Arxian Republic warships. General Kothra had committed forces to the mission, both as a test of human capabilities and as an insult to their old enemies, the Vraxil Empire. On the Arxian flagship, Kothra spoke with his officers. Watch how the humans operate. If their prisoners have even half the resilience we've heard about, and their soldiers are even half as determined, they will make valuable allies. Back on Krell 9, Do-hyun and Yuna were in their cells. 7 months since Do-hyun's capture, 3 weeks since Yuna's. Both were thin, scarred, exhausted. But unbroken, Vothrak had stopped the torture sessions 3 days ago. Not out of mercy, but out of defeat. The High Command had given him a final order. Either break the humans by the end of the week or execute them publicly and accept his failure. The Krell Master sat in his office, staring at the files. 7 months. He had never taken 7 months to break anyone. Most species lasted days, even the strongest weeks, but these humans had fundamentally resisted everything. He had reported to the High Command that human psychological resilience appeared to be a species trait, not an individual anomaly. His recommendation was to avoid capturing humans alive when possible. They were too difficult to process, too resistant to standard methods. Better to simply eliminate them in combat. It was an admission of defeat, and it burned him. A guard rushed into his office.
Sir, we have multiple contacts entering the system.
Unknown signatures.
Vothrak stood quickly. Battle stations. Identify those ships, sensors reading Earth Alliance vessels and Arxian Republic support ships. They're heading directly for us. For a moment, Vothrak felt something he rarely experienced. Fear. The humans had come for their people, and they had brought allies. On the Resolute, Somin watched as the initial defense platforms opened fire. The ship shook slightly as shields absorbed the hits. All ships begin assault pattern. Target their communications first. I don't want them calling for reinforcements. The Arxian ships moved with precision, their advanced weapon systems taking out the outer defenses. The Earth vessels pushed through, smaller and faster, heading straight for the prison complex. Inside Krell 9, alarms wailed. Prisoners in their cells looked up with confusion and sudden hope. Guards rushed to defensive positions. The prison was designed to keep people in, but it had defensive systems for external attacks. Do-hyun heard the alarms and felt his heart rate increase. He didn't dare hope. Hope was dangerous, but something was happening. In the next cell, Yuna called out through the ventilation. "What's going on?" "I don't know. Stay ready." Minko, in his adjacent cell, was already standing by his door. Other prisoners were doing the same. Whatever was happening, it was an opportunity. The Earth assault teams breached the outer hull. Somin led her team through the corridors, moving with practiced efficiency. They encountered Vraxil guards and fought through them. The combat was close and brutal. "Detention level, Section 3, Somin called into her comm.
Beta team status?
"Exit route secured. You have 10 minutes. They reached the detention level." The force fields were still active, keeping prisoners contained. Somin's technical specialist worked on the control panel while the team set up defensive positions. Dropping force fields in 3, 2, 1. All across the detention level, the shimmering barriers disappeared. Prisoners stepped cautiously out of their cells, not quite believing what was happening. Somin's team moved down the corridor, checking cells.
Captain Do-hyun Lee, Yuna Choi.
"Identify yourselves." Do-hyun stepped out of his cell. He was barely recognizable. Thin, scarred, beard grown out, but his eyes were clear. "I'm Captain Lee." Somin felt a wave of relief. "Sir, we're taking you home. There's a civilian engineer, Yuna Choi, 3 cells down. They found her. She was in similar condition, struggling to stand. A medic moved to her immediately, but she waved him off. "I can walk. Help the others first." Other prisoners were emerging. Different species, different crimes, all with the same broken look. Except they weren't entirely broken anymore. The humans had shown them that resistance was possible. "We can't take everyone," one of Somin's soldiers said. "There are over 100 prisoners here. Then we make multiple trips," Somin said. "Alpha team, start moving prisoners to the extraction point. Priority to those who can't walk." Do-hyun looked at his rescuers. "I can fight. Give me a weapon." "Sir, you need medical attention." "I need a weapon. This place has terrorized the galaxy long enough." Somin understood. She handed him a plasma pistol. "Don't make me regret this." Do-hyun checked the weapon with hands that still remembered their training. Beside him, Minko stepped forward. "I will fight too. For my dignity." Other prisoners echoed the sentiment. Species that had been broken, beaten, humiliated. They wanted to fight back, even if just for a moment. Vothrak mobilized his guards. He was not going to let his prisoners escape. It would be the final humiliation. He led a squad toward the detention level personally. They met Somin's team in the main corridor. The fighting was intense. Plasma bolts and projectile rounds filled the air. Prisoners who could fight did so with fury born from months or years of suffering. Do-hyun found himself face to face with a Vraxil guard, the same species that had tortured him for 7 months. The guard raised his weapon. Do-hyun was faster. The plasma bolt took the guard in the chest. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger. Just the need to keep moving, keep fighting, get everyone out. Vothrak appeared at the end of the corridor. He saw Do-hyun armed and fighting. Their eyes met across the chaos of battle. "You," Vothrak growled. He raised his own weapon, a heavy plasma rifle. "You destroyed everything." Do-hyun didn't respond with words. He moved, faster than his weakened body should have allowed. Years of training overriding pain and exhaustion. He closed the distance, knocked the rifle aside, and in one smooth motion, disarmed the Krell master. Vothrak fell to the ground. His rifle clattered away. He was helpless at the mercy of the prisoner he had tortured for 7 months. He waited for the killing blow, but Do-hyun just looked down at him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "Live with your failure." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Vothrak alive. It was a more complete victory than death could ever be. The prisoners were being evacuated. Some could walk. Others needed to be carried. The Earth soldiers and even some of the Arxian forces helped, showing a compassion that surprised many of the aliens. Yuna was being helped by a medic when she stopped. "Do-hyun, there are more prisoners in the lower levels. Political prisoners. They've been here for years. Can you guide us there?" She nodded. Despite her condition, she led them deeper into the prison. They found another detention section, these cells even worse than the previous ones. The prisoners here had been forgotten by everyone. "Get them all," Somin ordered. "Every last one." The extraction ships were waiting outside. Multiple trips were made. Human vessels and Arxian ships worked together, evacuating prisoners as fast as they could. The Vraxil defenses were collapsing under the coordinated assault. In the final moments, as the last prisoners were being loaded, Do-hyun stood at the entrance to Krell 9 and looked back. This place had tried to break him. It had tried to break Yuna. It had broken countless others. But it hadn't won. Not ultimately. Minko approached him, walking with difficulty but walking nonetheless. "Captain Lee, thank you. You gave us back something I thought was lost forever." "What's that?" "The will to try." They evacuated. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Krell 9 damaged and humiliated behind them. On the journey back to Earth space, medics treated the rescued prisoners. Do-hyun and Yuna both required extensive medical care, but they refused to be separated from the other rescued prisoners. They wanted to make sure everyone was being cared for. General Kothra visited the Earth carrier personally. He met with Somin and looked at the rescued prisoners with something like awe. "Your people don't quit, do they?" "No," Somin said simply. "We don't. The Arxian Republic would like to formalize an alliance with Earth. If your worst enemies can endure 7 months of Vraxil torture without breaking, your allies must be very fortunate." Back on Earth, the story spread quickly. Captain Do-hyun Lee and Engineer Yuna Choi had become symbols, not of suffering but of resilience. The Terran Coalition offered them medals, public ceremonies, positions of honor. They declined all of it. Do-hyun returned to his sister Mina. She was completing her medical residency. When she saw him thin and scarred and exhausted, she just held him and cried. "You came home," she said. "You promised and you came home. I told you I would." Yuna returned to her work, though she transferred to a different colony. She wanted to keep building, keep creating. She had spent months in darkness. Now she wanted to work in the light. But she stayed in touch with the other rescued prisoners. They formed a support group, helping each other adjust to freedom. The bonds formed in that terrible place didn't break just because they were free. Across the galaxy, the story of Krell 9 became legend. The humans who couldn't be broken. The prisoners who inspired a revolt. The rescue that succeeded against impossible odds. Diplomatic alliances shifted. Species that had been neutral suddenly wanted Earth as an ally. The Vraxil Empire found itself increasingly isolated as former neutral parties reconsidered their positions. In Vraxil space, Vothrak was removed from his position. The prison at Krell 9 was partially shut down. The High Command issued new protocols regarding human prisoners. Avoid capture when possible. Humans were classified as high-resistance targets. It was an acknowledgement that spread through military databases across the galaxy. Humans were not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the most advanced, but they were the ones who would not quit, who would not break, who would endure impossible circumstances and emerge still themselves. A year later, at a memorial ceremony on Earth, stones were placed for all those who had died at Krell 9, both human and alien. Do-hyun placed a stone with names carved into it. Prisoners he had known, who hadn't survived to see rescue. Yuna stood beside him. Neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. As they walked away, a young officer approached. She was fresh from training, eager and nervous. "Sir, Captain Lee, I just wanted to say, your story is why I joined. You showed us what it means to be human." Do-hyun gave her a tired smile. "Being human isn't about being unbreakable. It's about getting broken and choosing to continue anyway. Remember that." The officer saluted and left. Yuna looked at Do-hyun. "Do you think it mattered? All that suffering?" "Yes, we showed them something they didn't understand. That there are beings who will choose principle over comfort, identity over survival. That's not weakness. That's strength they never calculated." In training facilities across Earth, new soldiers learned about Krell 9, not as a horror story, but as an example. Endurance wasn't about being impervious to pain. It was about acknowledging the pain and continuing regardless. The galaxy had learned a lesson. Humanity had introduced a new variable into the galactic equation. Not military strength or technological superiority, just simple, stubborn, unreasonable persistence. In the end, that was enough. The stars continued their eternal dance. Civilizations rose and fell, but the story remained. The story of two humans who faced the galaxy's worst torture and came through it still themselves, still human, still unbreakable where it mattered most, not in body but in spirit. And that spirit, that refusal to submit, that determination to remain yourself no matter the cost, that was humanity's true strength. The galaxy had learned to respect it. Some had learned to fear it. All had learned to acknowledge it. Humanity, against all odds, had earned its place among the stars, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple act of enduring, of being themselves, of proving that some things cannot be broken by any amount of force. It was the most human victory possible, and it echoed across the galaxy, a message clear and simple. We are here, we endure, we do not break, and we never ever quit.